Hey everyone, I am excited to have you join me for this edition of the Psychology of Self-Defense presented by Asphalt Anthropology. My name is Beverly Baker. I'm a self-defense instructor, and I'm really excited to share with you what actually a really good friend of mine who I just think is really an awesome person. And I'm going to keep my intro short, but I just want to let you know why you're going to love her. We had a conversation recently about a situation she had, and I was like, can we please talk about this publicly, because I think a lot of the things that came up, really a lot of people can relate to, and can use some of this to kind of shift their mindset and be more safe, more street smart, and more safe. So I know Lorelei. I'll let her tell you exactly how we met. But I know her. She's from Philly proper. I grew up in Westchester, right outside. Lorelei, I know you've told me some stories about, being that Philly girl, and that's kind of the whole like conversation I want to have with you, is like, you can be street smart and someone can still like target you, and you did so many great right things, and you were able to successfully dodge what happened, and we'll get into the details of that later. But I just want to really like let people know like what a street smart savvy person you are. I've learned so much from you and I'll let you take it away. I can't really say it without you talking about how we met.
Yeah, totally. Oh, thank you, Beverly. That was a lovely intro. You feel free to introduce me literally anywhere that I have to go publicly, because I just really appreciate all of your lovely
Okay,
work.
sign me up.
So Beverly and I know each other. You and I know each other through clinic defense. We met when doing clinic defense with LA for Choice, which at the time was LA's only clinic escorting kind of organization. And I think I maybe was working with you for like 10 or 15 minutes before I was like, this is random, but are you from the Philadelphia area? Like, it just like, I don't know, like game recognized game. Like, I just like recognized your vibe. I am from Philly. I went to high school outside of Philly, actually not too far from Westchester. And then, after high school in the suburbs, I moved to New York, where I lived for a decade before moving to LA. So besides the work we did, the work we did at LA for Choice, I have mostly lived in cities all of my life. And
Yeah.
so I think that I already kind of had the like eyes like a spider, like 8 of them on all sides of my head thing going on that
Yeah.
is, so important when we talk about self-defense, I think.
Yeah, and you've told me stories about being in New York and Philly, and one thing you shared a story before we get into the other story is like, you know, I guess young in your 20s, out partying, walking the streets, and it's like so many women are discouraged from living life and being out because it's not safe, and there are ways to be safe and be mindful of your environment, and I really think that city girls like you, we have a lot to learn from. And so I wanted to have this conversation, and so thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so why don't we jump into what happened to you? This was in December, and you did, when you were telling me like what was going on in the city at that time. This was right before Christmas. What was all over the news? What are people talking about? Where's your head? Where's your mind? What's going on?
Yeah, totally. So this happened right before Christmas. I think maybe 7 to 10 days before, like the week or like 2 weeks before Christmas. Everybody at that time, the Omicron wave was, just starting to like really take shape, and I think people were really starting to get an impression of like exactly how dire the situation at the holidays would be. Also, this was also people's first opportunity to like travel and spend the holidays with their families for like
Yeah.
2+ years. So it was like absolute pandemonium, like everybody trying to get out of LA, traveling was like a nightmare. There was traffic everywhere. Also, simultaneously, what was happening was there was a rise in kind of an attempt, I think, by the LAPD to like make people think that crime in LA was like suddenly worse than it like actually always is, because there were a lot of stories in the news about like follow home robberies. And I had noticed a couple of years ago, I moved from West Hollywood to like a really quiet part of, and I had noticed just like in my own neighborhood that there seemed to be an increase in like vehicle related crimes, particularly like catalytic converter thefts, or like car break-ins, that were happening in my neighborhood that hadn't happened before, because before I lived in like the middle of West Hollywood, and there were always like college kids and drag queens partying in the street until like 3 a.m. So like people could see if somebody like smashed somebody's car. But you
Yeah.
know, in like a sleepier neighborhood, that was not the case. So I think that that was something that was in the back of my mind at the time for sure. I drive, which is like prime target for catalytic converter theft. So I had kind of for the past couple of months just been very conscious of like, if I park my car on the street at night, how visible is it? Like what other cars are parked around it? Like, you know, stuff like that, like kind of keeping in the back of my mind, like how to fix my, you know, how to protect my catalytic converter so I don't get it stolen and total my ancient car.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, the thing that had been really top of mind for me at that moment. But yeah, this was just before the holidays. Pardon. And I knew that I was staying in town for the holidays, so I wasn't like doing a holiday rush or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like I was, you know, we were getting ready to like hunker down.
Yeah.
So what happened was, this was a Thursday evening. I had a couple of errands to run, that included with like the most time sensitive errand was I had to pick up books from the library. I had like 3 library holds that came in. And I go to a library up in Locking Out of Flint Ridge, which is like up the hill, maybe about like 15 minutes from my house, LA County Library. Fine, free, baby, check it out.
Yeah.
So I go, I pick up my 3 library books. At this time, because it's winter, it's like dark out. I have to get to the library by 6. I get to the library by 6. I pick up my 3 library books. I put them on the passenger seat of my car where there is a green bag, a reusable shopping bag with a package in it that I have to drop off at UPS. So my plan is to go back down the hill, drop my package off at UPS, and then I realized I needed, I was totally out of contact solution and I was going to work out later. So I wanted to swing by the Rite Aid near my house and pick up some contact solution. And I had an hour to do all of this before I get back to meet my landlady who's dropping off a faucet, but that's another story. So I get to UPS. I leave UPS. I drive to the Rite Aid. The Rite Aid in my neighborhood is like right below the freeway exit. It shares a parking lot with like a huge, I think like a Vons, like an IHOP, like a lot of stuff that's like very busy, open 24 hours. This is a very well lit, well trafficked parking lot in like a neighborhood where like pretty much like exclusively old Armenian grandparents lived until probably like 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I park my car pretty near the Rite Aid. I go into the drugstore. I get my contact lens solution. I come back out. I sit in my car and I think to myself, I guess I'll pause for a second to paint the picture of what I was driving home to. And I guess like why my driving home procedure is the way it is.
Yeah.
So I live in one of those like absolutely fucking beautiful, like 1920s, 30s Spanish style fourplexes. So I live in a big, you know, I live in like one of those big buildings that has like 4 apartments in it. And I am the only apartment in my complex that does not have a covered garage. My partner and I have a carport. And it's awesome because the carport is like really deep. So we kind of have like a built-in guest parking spot, which is great.
Oh, cool.
But
yeah.
The carport is also visible from the street. And so like our cars are visible from the street as well. And our carport is like really deep. Like I basically drive straight up my driveway, like into like a very deep carport that's like open, but like fenced on either side. And I park my car at the front end of the carport so my partner can park his behind me so that his car is visible because his car is under warranty and mine is not. So if my catalytic converter gets stolen, I'm like infinitely more fucked.
So you have really thought this through. Like
I really thought this through. Yes,
yeah.
I really thought this through. So, you know, because I am very aware that like pulling into basically like a fenced chute is leaving me in like a very vulnerable position, I like to make it so that when I get home after dark, I like to rig my whole setup so that I am in my car the least amount of time possible after parking it. Like I like to basically like drive up, put my car in park, turn it off, get out of there and get it to my apartment. I don't want to be loitering in my car. So back to the Rite Aid. Very well lit, well traveled parking lot. People are like coming and going from IHOP. They're going to be doing that until like, you know, the world ends. Thank God, bless IHOP. So I figure I'm sitting in my car and I see my 3 library books and my green bag that is now empty because I've just left the UPS store. And I think to myself, let me put these 3 library books in this green bag so that when I get home and park my car, I can just turn it off, grab the bag, get in the house so I don't have to like fumble with these books and put them in this bag and take maybe an extra 7 seconds in my carport.
Yeah.
So I'm in my car. I don't have it on yet. My seatbelt is on. I reach over. I put the 3 books in the green bag on the passenger seat. And I don't know why, but like something like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up in such a way that dictated that I should look up.
Yeah.
And I looked up. And as I looked up, I saw this guy, this like fucking like dime store Mac Miller looking guy, absolutely 100% coming for the driver's side door of my car. And I saw him as he was like basically like right at like the nose, like the hood of my car.
Yeah.
And he saw me make eye contact with him. And I registered this kind of like, oh shit, look on his face. And in that moment, I kind of realized what was happening. And so I started my car, threw it into reverse, and got out of there. And I could see behind the guy, there was a vehicle. He had a buddy in a vehicle, and the vehicle was idling, and it wasn't directly across from me. It was in like the next line of cars over.
Yeah.
And as I was driving away, out of the corner of my eye and the corner of my ear, because the window was open, I heard the guy who I caught coming through the driver's side window of my car, like very audibly, like being upset. Like he was like, shit, God damn it. Like very upset that I had like driven away.
Yeah.
And so I pulled out. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I got a little, like the reality of like what almost happened sank in more and more. And I got really freaked out. I called my best friend who I knew was sitting behind a desk at a job that was not his favorite. And so I knew he would pick up the phone, and I had him talk to me while I drove around and made sure I wasn't being followed. And I had him talk to me until I got home, and I parked my car and I got in my house.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, so that is the whole story. And now you know exactly where I parked my car.
I think it's so interesting how, well, actually, before we go there, like when I can't remember how it came up, but you had reached out and you wanted to talk about it. And what was your thinking to talk about it? Like, is this processing it? Like these scary things happen, but I know you had some specific questions. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, totally. I definitely wanted to process it. And I think I also wanted your thoughts just from like a self-defense perspective on if there was anything I could have done differently. Because what that situation basically made me realize is like, I am pretty up to snuff on like basic self-defense procedures if I'm like a young lady walking around by myself in New York City. But like LA is a car culture. And I just realized that like there is a whole way of thinking about self-defense when you're living in a place where everyone is dependent on their cars that I'm just like still not used to, even though I've lived here for a really long time. So I guess one of the reasons I wanted to hit you up was to see if there was anything that I had missed in terms of like self-defense protocols that I could have put in place. And it was really helpful to me to hear you say like, basically, no, like sometimes this stuff just happens. And the important part is like not outsmarting it before it happens, but figuring out how to react in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, and like just in knowing you and working with you at the clinic, like I know how like smart and like the 8 eyes you talked about, and some of the stories that we've swapped of, kind of, being out in the city and doing that. It's like, and then you did like the detail, like, and you just did here of describing like, okay, before I get home, I know I have this window that of time that I want to do. And so what really stuck out to me was like, you were doing everything right? Like you were planning ahead so that you weren't more vulnerable in your home environment. And like it was that 7 seconds that somebody just like had that opportunity. And it's like we're kind of damned if we do and damned if we don't sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, maybe something could have happened at your house. And so for me, just like you are just so like with it, like I don't have anything to add to tell you what to do. And I was just so like, but I get it, right? Because we always do that. That's like how our brain works, is we want to get better because we're just wired to survive. We're wired to thrive. But I'm curious, like, is there anything you would have done differently? I wasn't there. Like I couldn't read the environment, but like maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't know. But I mean, that's the only person that can really kind of answer that.
Yeah, totally. The more I thought about it, the more I'm also interested in that being my reaction, just because I do feel like I do feel like a way we are programmed as female identifying people is that when we are victims of assault or violence, to first think like, what could I have done differently to prevent that, when like the onus isn't obviously actually on us at all. It's on other people not to assault us. But anyway, so, it just made me, that moment just made me really reflect on my instant reaction to think, what did I do wrong? And how that is actually also a result of my societal programming. So just want to throw that out there. That is something that really interested me. Now that I've had a little distance from this, like the only thing I think I could have done differently, and I'm not even sure I would have thought to at the time, honestly, because like, why would you have to think to do this, is put my books in my bag as soon as, in the library parking lot.
Yeah.
Because like a library parking lot in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, like you know, I'm the shadiest looking character in that
You're
parking
the
lot. I'm
shady.
not the Tesla, you know what I mean? Right? And you know, it's like obviously like it's a county building, so it's like,
Yeah.
you know, monitored in a different way and controlled in a different way and stuff like that. So I mean that would probably be the only thing that I would have done differently. But you know, looking back on it, I do wonder if like my immediate response to be like, how did I fuck up, is more of a result of like my conditioning than like actually having done anything kind of like wrong or careless, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. I mean, because you like the way you described, how you park and how you take care of things. It's like I would not, careless does not come to my mind. And so, like, okay, maybe you coulda, shoulda, woulda done the book thing at La Cañada Flint Ridge, but that just keeps like moving where you do it. And like when you did it, you know what I mean? So it's I don't know. It's that's the damned if you do, damned if you don't. But like the ultimate thing is that everything you did was right because you got away. Like he didn't you know get you, he didn't get your car, whatever he was specifically after. And so
Yeah.
I loved it when you're telling this story this time. I don't remember catching it quite as much, but you talked about like this just feeling. Can you talk more about the feeling? So you're messing with your books so that you don't have to mess with them at home. And so what can you tell any more detail on that?
I honestly, I don't even know. There was like a little voice in my head or my gut
Yeah.
probably that was just look up.
Yeah.
And I looked up and I locked eyes with him. And it took me like, you know, from that moment, like everything was kind of like a delayed reaction because
Yeah.
I think it was my body, frankly, going into like fight or flight. I am somebody who lives with anxiety anyway. And so I think in that moment, my body was just like, I'm going to take over before brain can assess what's going on, because that's the way we're going to get out of this. Cause
Yeah.
like, if I thought about it, I would have frozen, you know what I mean? Instead, I just kind of like kept moving. But yeah, I don't know what that voice was that told me to look up and made me look up in time. It is honestly, I think, you know, I think it's the same voice that like helped me, you know, spend my 20s in New York safely. I mean, obviously I am aware that like my like white cis privilege also factors into that a lot, of
Sure.
course, but like
Yeah.
I do think that I do think that especially living in a city as a woman who is coming and going. I mean, I used to be in theater, so I was often leaving rehearsals to go home from like work or whatever at like midnight, 12:30, sometimes 1 a.m. You know, I think that like being a woman in a city kind of traveling and commuting at those hours, you learn to listen to that voice in your head.
Yeah. Well, and something you
Yeah.
said too was like there's our mind and then there's our body. And in the neuroscience that I read and research on this, like how our threat responders, it's not our logical brain that picks it up. It is the more primitive part of our brain, but it's also our physical body. Like different things in
Right.
our body will pick it up. And a lot of times I think we get hung up on, well, I can't quite articulate what my feeling is, so it must be, I'll just blow it off and it be wrong. And I love like your reaction was so instantaneous to the like your physical sensation, whatever it was. And it is hard to recall. And I kind of asked you a little bit of a trick question because when we're in that mode, we're not in the thinking mode. So it's not like we have great recall of those events. That's why people who are assaulted or harmed, they have trouble remembering details, right? Because it's like our
Right.
brain's not working that way. And so I love that you just, and it sounds like because you've trained yourself in some of these experiences, like you've just trained, your mind has been trained by your body. Like I have this feeling, okay, look up or do what I need to do, and you were able to get out of there. That is like just a perfect illustration of that. You also said something when we talked that I can so relate to, and other women can so relate to, and that's why I wanted to. A part of this conversation was that you kind of started when you got home. I think a little second guessing a few things, and tell me about that.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I got home, you know, and I felt like I had failed in a way. Like I was like, I can't believe, you know, here I am, you know, I have lived in New York and now I've lived in LA for a long time, two like major cities. I have managed to like keep myself safe throughout that entire time. Like what about me got soft now? Or like what about me, you know, what skill set did I not keep up with enough, like after like moving to the suburbs, or, you know, after like moving to like a quieter neighborhood, maybe I like took some more things for granted, even though like I don't know. I'm like definitely the type of true crime fan that is sketched out more in like less populated places than I am in big cities. Like, I'm one of
Same. Oh, totally.
my partner and I have this fight all the time. He's like, all the psychos live in the city. And I'm like, they don't. They live in the woods. So like, please never leave me alone in the woods.
Yeah, they're going to bury the bodies there.
Yeah, totally. But I could not help but wonder, like, what about me had gotten soft or something like that, or you know, had just not kept up with like the pace of the world, to prevent myself from seeing this situation coming. Which was, you know, which was weird. But I'm also, you know, I'm also the type of person where it's like, you know, I would bring home a report card with like a bunch of A's and an A minus and a B plus, and I'd be like, "What's the matter with that class?" You know, like, why did I get a B? You know, so you know, it's also just kind of like that part of my brain, just kind of like eating itself like a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah. Well,
but
and
yeah,
again, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, I did, you know, I did wonder, like, is there something that I learned that I forgot? Or is there something that I didn't know about because I don't know enough about like self-defense and awareness when I'm in a car, you know, like I did wonder if there was something about kind of my own sensory awareness and my own ability to assess my environment and move through it safely that had like gotten rusty with age or time.
Well, and that's an interesting point because it refers back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, kind of that victim blaming or that self victim or self blaming or self victim blaming. And, you know, I think there's like this half truth that floats around self defense that, oh, if you walk around confident, you'll be fine. And it's, first of all, nobody can walk around confident all the time, right? You get that email from your boss yelled at you, or, you know, you break up with your boyfriend breaks up with you, or, you know, whatever's going on. Like, who's confident all the time? Like, maybe that is good for if you only go in these environments once in a while. But like, if you're living in this environment, real life happens and you're not confident, you're not always paying attention, life is going on. But I think the key is that you had just had so much practice in your earlier kind of experiences that you were just kind of like more readier, if that's a word. It is my take on that. But I think it's interesting how, like, again, our brain, we think that it's not a fun and comfortable place to sit here and think, oh, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? But that's actually a normal part of, like, that's our part of our brain taking care of us. It can go off and go crazy and do too much. But like, I just want to encourage you to not like beat yourself up for like thinking that way, you know, because it's just like a part of the normal survival part of stuff. And now you also talked too about the idea of like, I thought this was interesting. I don't think I caught this the first time you talked, but the car culture. So in LA is really interesting because we are so like car focused, and cars play such a bigger role in everything here, including how people hurt and harm each other. I mean, what is it? The high speed chases are basically the city's wide like sport. Like if we're going to enter a sport in the Olympics when they come, we should do car racing, right? Or car chases, and that's because of how we're physically and geographically laid out. And so if I think, did I mention the book, The Burglar's Guide to the City to you?
Did.
So this guy, he's so great. He breaks down different cities, but a lot in LA, and how actually, yes, to answer your earlier point and question, yeah, cars actually do play into how crime unfolds in LA, because we have the freeway system. People can take off for long stretches. You know, I would probably get caught in 2 seconds. I'm sure I'd get stuck in traffic or at a red light or, you know, something like that. But like somehow these people magically weave through traffic. But another thing, you talked about the location of that and being, yes, you're right, being right there by an access point off the highway. That is a fast getaway. So if I want to rip you off, I can do that, grab your car, grab your whatever, get in that buddy's car and take off on the highway. So that is a pressure of not a pressure point, more of a there's a word that's not coming to me. Again, menopause, brain fog. But there's this kind of place where things are transitory and you can just easily snatch and grab. Like it.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like the example, and see, you probably know this. When you get on the train, do you stand by the door?
No.
Yeah.
No. The other thing that drives me crazy that I used to yell about, like at every friend I brought to New York City about, was the people who or stand at the either at the top of the subway steps or at the bottom of the steps right before the turnstile and
Yeah.
open their wallet to get out their Metro card.
Yeah.
Or as they're going down the steps, blind, they open their wallet to get out your Metro card. And I'm like, oh, you're just holding out your wallet to somebody.
Yeah.
You're literally like, free wallet. Like, what are you doing?
And in a place where they can grab it and run. And
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that is such a great, like a kind of a more visual like example, smaller, that we can see. Like it's harder to see the scale of a city, and here's the shopping center and here's the freeway entrance ramp, but it's the same principle that applies. Right. So yeah, so there's that aspect. And yeah, if you haven't checked out The Burglar's Guide to the City, which I know you're a crime writer, right? Are you?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's absolutely on my list.
Yeah, sure. And you will dig that. So something else, Lorelei, you talked about different places you've lived, and now you're in kind of a more chill, low-key environment, and you're worried about getting soft. But I think you raised really some good points, though, about you have to turn things on in some places, and it doesn't, you kind of like, maybe you have to be a 10, maybe a 5 here, and then a 0 here. Like, can you talk about some of that experience for yourself?
Yeah, totally. I think that I am just my awareness is heightened in different ways for different reasons. Like I said earlier, I'm actually usually somebody who's like more sketched out in less populated areas than I am in like cities. Like the suburbs scare me infinitely more because I'm
Same.
like, it was like suburbs. You know what I mean? Like none of you were fooling me. None of you. And so, when I'm in my neighborhood or like less populated neighborhoods, like other parts of the valley, I am like very, very aware when I'm walking down the street by myself because there aren't other people on the street. Like the thing about New York, like a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about like being young and dumb and drunk in New York is like, like very dangerous or whatever, but there are always other people around, tons of other people around, other people on the train, other people waiting for the train. If you're on the subway alone at night, other people like walking around on the streets, like there truly is always someone out. So, most of the time, like if somebody fucks with you, somebody else is going to see it, especially if you yell loud enough, but yeah. So I am used to kind of like that equation of self-defense and awareness. But, yeah. When there aren't other people around, that's when my spidey senses get a little heightened. So I'm always aware of like when I'm walking from like my car to my apartment or someone else's apartment. And I'm always aware of like if I have to park a block away, like I'm always aware of like walking back for sure. I'm also honestly like a lot more aware of like the potential for things like home invasions out here, just because, just because it is quieter here. And if something does happen, I know that it will be harder to notice because of the nature of this neighborhood. Like it is a little bit sleepier, is a little bit more suburban. I basically gone from like living in like the East Village to like living in the part of Queens like way far out. That's like basically like, like cops and like people who work in Connecticut, and that's it. Like where you have to have a car,
Yeah.
And so there, it's just different. It's like, it's different things to worry about, crimes of opportunity are different in those places because the opportunities are different, like in a big city, you have to worry about like pickpocketing or like somebody like snatching, grabbing your purse. Like in a suburb like this, it's like, I definitely worry if I'm parking my car, if I'm going to a friend's house and I'm parking my car on the street for a couple hours, I definitely worry about like, what is visible inside my car right now? Like, how can I make sure that like none of my valuables are visible, or like not even to like give anybody like a temptation to break my window and take something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because when you're talking about like having the bag in La Cañada, like that doesn't seem like a concern maybe for you there, but maybe like in WeHo, you would have had it tucked under your seat. I don't know. Like it sounds like those are some of the investments you might be talking about, or
yeah, totally. Like WeHo now, maybe. But in my neighborhood now, definitely. You know what I mean? Like anywhere where I'm leaving my car on the street in a neighborhood I'm not familiar with, where like like I don't know who's walking down the street. I focus more on things like making sure that there aren't any valuables visible in my car.
Yeah, I have to, while we're on this subject of kind of like adjusting to our environment, a couple of weeks ago, I had ordered a bunch of stuff online from Ann Taylor, and I got like different sizes because I didn't know what I would need. So I wound up having to return stuff, and I went up to Pasadena. Now, you know where I live. I live in Hollywood, in the heart of the tourist district. It like you have to be on all the time here, right? You just have to be on. So I get up to Pasadena and I park my car like half a block from the store. I return my purchases, try on a few things, get a few more things, and I come out to my car, couldn't find my keys. I look at my car, they're my fucking ignition, excuse my French. Yeah. And so I'm blaming
Oh my
everything on
God.
menopause right now because my brain is like, because like, why would I do that? I would not do that in Hollywood, right? Like
No.
it's and so anyway, so I called AAA, they came, they saved the day. And so, and it's so funny because Brian actually worries about me more. He told me, he's like, I worry about you when you like drive and go to places like that. He's like, I don't worry about you walking around Hollywood, but I'm like, literally, I am a ditz in my car. I'm just
Yes.
gonna admit
Yeah,
it.
no, I was that way for like a few years after moving out here. And
Yeah,
I'm really lucky. I'm surrounded by, I'm very fortunate in that I managed to surround myself with a community shortly after moving out here of women
yeah,
who like have lived out here for a while and have lived in all different neighborhoods and do know more about that stuff and did come from other parts of the country that are, more like car centric. Because
yeah,
yeah, I didn't know. It's basically, it's a weird thing. Like, you basically have to learn self-defense all over again. Not self-defense necessarily, but that kind of like risk assessment,
yeah,
because your car is like an extension of yourself in a lot of ways, in
yeah.
in this, especially in LA in this situation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so when I know when you and I talked, it was still a bit more fresh and raw for you, and
Yeah.
you were still kind of in that like a little bit of beating yourself up or thinking you were bad and wrong for taking 7 seconds to plan ahead for another risk, and like you're in a much more like it sounds like you processed it and you're feeling really good. Can you talk about that process to like go from there to feeling more good about what happened, and how can people take that journey if it's something like that they just want to beat themselves up because something almost happened and I should be invincible. Life freaking happens. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, totally. Well, I do have to say that like I am very grateful to you for taking the time to jump on the phone with me and process, because that honestly really helped. And hearing from you and hearing from like a couple of other friends that I trust, including like one of my best friends who was like literally in the military, so I trust her to know how to handle herself.
Yeah,
Telling me like it's not your fault. There's nothing differently you could have done. Like sometimes this just happens, and just helping me try to like change perspective, and instead of being, kind of disappointed that this almost happened to me, being, finding gratitude in the fact that nothing did happen to me. Cause like, I'm not trying to like replace my, if it had been like a smash and grab purse situation, I'm not trying to replace my credit cards before the holidays. You know what I mean? So it's
mm,
just like, I am somebody who during the pandemic, I did start like a gratitude journaling process. I'm sorry, that's like the most like Reese Witherspoon's book club thing I'll ever say, I promise. Um, and that does help, just like taking helping me shift my brain from like gritty the Flyers mascot level of like nihilism to like just being grateful that I was able to get out of the situation. I think that time helped. I think that journaling helped. I think that like talking to friends helped for sure. I reached out to you, and then I reached out to like three of my like best friends who I would trust their take on the situation. If this happened to them, I would want to know how they handled it, and I talked to them, and that was really
great.
helpful. I think that like talking to friends and talking to just being able to like lean on your community for support with their consent, obviously, was really helpful.
Yeah. And really, you're talking about gratitude. It's like I'm so grateful for like your well running threat assessment center, right? Like that
Yeah,
actually works. Like these things happen, we get targeted and we think, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. But like, let's take a minute for like how well we performed. And and you totally did that. And so I just wanted to like make sure you heard that from me again, but also for anyone who's listening who thinks that, oh, I wasn't walking around confidently enough, or I wasn't keeping my head on a swivel. It's like life freaking happens. And sometimes like luck is just really a part of the equation. And like that guy, just right place, right time, or wrong place, like however you look at that. So yeah, I'm so grateful that you were on the ball to
yeah.
save your own bacon.
Yeah, thank you. And I do have to say, like, I'm the only daughter of a single mother, and so I do think that, and I lived in a matriarchal household like growing up in Philadelphia, and so
Yeah,
I am really lucky. Like, I did have access to those conversations about like, what do you do if you're like sitting at a car at a red light and like somebody shady comes up to the car and like you know, just like different things to look out for. And I am also very lucky in that, you know, in my like teens and early 20s living in New York, I had women who were a little older than me, who lived in the city a little longer, kind of step in and mentor me and like teach me how to really hold my keys. It's not the way one in between each finger that everyone necessarily thinks, you know, and teach
Right.
me about like stuff like that. So,
Ah,
you
I love
know,
it.
I am grateful to, you know, I really appreciate you saying that. And I hear your acknowledgement of my kind of like heightened risk assessment and awareness. And I thank you for that. But I do also have to say, like, a big part of it is like community as well. And it's just, you know, I'm very grateful that I have had women in my life from day one who just like raised me, you know, to not necessarily like be afraid, but to, you know, keep my eyes open
Yeah.
and see situations for what they are without judging them, and just kind of like get out of it, as you know, recognize red flags and
Yeah.
acknowledge them and get away from them as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I think that that really, you know, again, how we met through clinic escorting, like that shows through, right? Like in those kind of like engagements where you have to have your eyes up and you have to kind of manage dicey things. I don't want to get into all the details of that, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's why, like, when we started this conversation, I'm like, this girl is so on the ball. I've seen her in action. So
Yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
again, that's just why I thought this was such an important conversation to have, because people think just because I got targeted, there's something wrong with me. And that's not,
Totally.
yeah. So,
Totally. And like, honestly, one of the reasons you were one of the first people I reached out to is because, you know, I remember we had to deal with some sticky situations in clinic escorting as well. And like, you are somebody who I always associate with being so on the ball. So I was like, if Beverly validates me, then it really wasn't my fault. So that is, you know, that is one of the reasons that I wanted to reach out to you immediately. Like, definitely like a major game recognized game moment.
yeah.
I learned so much from you
Oh,
doing clinic defense as well.
oh my gosh. You know, it's so, this is a whole other subject, but one thing that really, and I love, you were actually addressing it earlier about how you've learned from so many women in your life about how to, you know, manage your body, how to manage your attention, how to manage your movement through time and space in these environments. And we really need to hear, like, that's what asphalt anthropology is all about, but it's not about me, right? Because it's about you, and it's about your mom and my mom and like all these women who have this experience. And I, you know, so please keep having these conversations with I'm talking to you, Lorelei, but also to the people who may be listening. Sometimes we think, oh, this person was a cop or this person was a bouncer, and you know, there's value that they can bring, but none of them are walking around as a woman, you know, with these kinds of things. And really, I think we should be elevating people who are, you know, people of color and LGBTQIA, because they're the real experts in knowing how to spot and dodge. So I think you pointed to some really, really valuable stuff there about like who to talk to, how to have these conversations, not just for yourself, but to pass it on as
For
well.
sure. Yeah. And it also is kind of constantly, I am also kind of constantly reminding myself that like a part of, you know, community care, I think now, especially in this moment, as we're starting to have really fundamentally important conversations about like the usefulness of policing. I think like a big part of community care is being able to look at situations through the eyes of people who are like even more at risk than ourselves, you know, like, so it's like, you know, I am very grateful for the risk assessment and awareness that I was taught, but I, you know, also fully acknowledge that like my risk level walking around as a cis able-bodied white woman
Right.
who, you know, appears to be of like a certain younger age is a very different risk assessment level than somebody who stands at intersections of different identities, you know, like
Right.
this is like a very tangential example, but like yesterday my partner and I were taking a drive up through like the hills above Pasadena because he works as a chef, so one of us is like always exposed to COVID, so what we do for entertainment is drive around now. And
Oh,
we drove past an intersection and we saw this like sweet, adorable little old lady, like in her 80s, standing in the middle of an intersection with like a kerchief and sunglasses, just waving everybody and smiling. And
mm,
everybody was driving past her and smiling. And we drove past, and it's like it was a pretty busy mountain road and it didn't have sidewalks. Like, this is a road that like people take to get through the canyons. Like, it's probably not like a Laurel Canyon, but definitely like a Coldwater Canyon level busy. And
okay. Yeah,
so we
that's, yeah.
drive, and so we wave at the lady, and then we drive, and then a couple seconds go by after we have both had time to like filter this experience through the eyes of that woman, and we were like, is she okay?
Mm,
Because like normally, like a woman like you or I standing in an intersection, like waving to people, you know, is a different risk level than a person in her 80s. And then we started to realize like she was by herself. There wasn't like a house like readily visible from where she was going. Like this could be like a neighborhood lady who likes to wave at people because it's a nice day. Or it could be someone who perhaps is dealing with some cognitive issues who was lost. And in that case, like it's like, I think that's where the lens of community care comes in. Like it's like, you know, what might take care of someone like me in that situation wouldn't be the right level of care or right level of awareness for someone at the intersection of different identities. So it's like, I feel like we kind of constantly, you know, when we see someone in like, if we are like as a bystander, like if we see someone in that situation, I think that, you know, it's important to remember that, you know, your risk level is different. Your risk level definitely depends on the identities that you inhabit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. I mean, because here we are, two white women talking about, you know, the issues of crime, which, you know, there can be a lot of hysteria associated with that and with that. But it all affects people differently. And I love that you're sensitive to the idea of how it, you know, I'm at risk for certain things. And even as I get older, I look at younger women and I'm not as targeted for them as certain things. And, you know, I've aged out, yay, but it still exists, which is not a yay.
Totally.
So, but yes, totally. I thank you for bringing that part in, because it's definitely needed in that conversation, because everything we're talking about here, this is like, we have to acknowledge these identities. This is who this identity happened to. This is how we'd react. So thank you.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Like, how do your identities make you like more or less vulnerable? Also, for the record, for anyone following along at home, we looped back around and the lady was fine.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, I was gonna add. Okay. Yeah. She was just a friendly, friendly lady. Okay. Very cool. Well, is there anything else you want to say? I mean, you've just like, in addition to your story and kind of walking us through that process and the mindset that I think so many people can relate to. I really appreciate some of these other factors you brought in. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
You know, I don't think that there is. I really appreciate you having me on and, you know, including me in this discussion. I hope that my experience and, you know, what I have to say about it is like hopeful or helpful to some people. You know, I really, really, really appreciate you bringing me on and allowing me to share this platform. I so respect the work you do. So if, you know, if I'm able to, if my experience is able to supplement it and support it, I'm so happy about that.
Well, and again, I mean, it's what we talked about. It is the voices of you and of other people that really drive this, and these are the conversations we're having. So it's thank you for joining in on that conversation. Let's go ahead and wrap up. And thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for listening. And Lorelei, just a really quick plug and brag, because you are a writer. Is there anything that you want to promote or plug while you're here? Or am I putting you on the spot? I didn't really prepare you for that.
You're putting me on the spot like a tiny little bit, but I can say sometime in 2022, I think, look out for me in the credits and my name on a written by of a show called Devil in Ohio on Netflix. I think it'll be out this summer or fall, but it's Netflix, so you truly never know. And because so much of being a professional screenwriter is just like getting paid to fail, basically, and like selling scripts that never air, I would definitely advise anyone who is interested in learning how to write scripts that are good enough to sell to check out Script Anatomy, which is where I trained as a screenwriter and where I worked freelance for a while. They're a really worthwhile organization that is owned and run by a woman of color who is a working writer herself.
What a fantastic organization. Great. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you, Lorelei.
Thank you so much, Beverly.